Hello, and welcome to Adventures in Learning Design, a series of conversations about ideas, principles, research and practice, exploring how we can make learning more effective and more enjoyable, whether that's in the workplace, at school, at university or at home. My name's Laurie Harrison.
And my name's Tim Gifford.
And we're both co-founders of LearnJam, a digital learning agency and consultancy. Episode 1. What is learning design? Tim, remind me what we talked about in this one.
Oh, it's a good one, Laurie. In this episode, we talk about the futility of asking people what they want, and we somehow managed to clumsily compare learning design to both music and medicine.
Sounds amazing. Let's hear it. Here I am with Tim Gifford, and we're here to talk about learning design, which is what we say we do most of the time in our work. So we thought it'd be interesting to have a quick chat about what we mean by learning design, what is learning design, and why it's so important for us and for everyone we work with. So, Tim, I'm going to kick things off with a question for you, which is, Tim Gifford, what is learning design?
Such a good question. I didn't see that one coming. I think I'm going to be really obnoxious and we'll answer that question by breaking it down to its constituent parts, right? So, what is learning, first of all? So learning, according to obviously my own extensive experience and what Wikipedia has to say on the subject, is the accumulation of knowledge, skills, behaviors, information through study, through lived experience, or through teaching. So something like fundamental, like when we talk about learning, we're talking about like the individual human being changing as a result of being taught something, studying something, or experiencing something. But ultimately, you are changed as a result of those things impacting you, right?
Yeah.
And neurologically, physically changed, like your brain is rewired in some way.
Yeah.
The design part, and the best definition I've got of this was given to me really recently by Stephen Dean, who is a entrepreneur, partner at Pre-Hype, and is a furniture designer and teaches at New York School of Visual Arts. And when I put this question to him, what is design? His definition was, design is the practice of looking at a situation in the world that can be improved and improving upon it. Mm-hmm. Applying yourself, applying your observation, applying your skills, applying your creativity to improve on something that you feel needs it. And I would, go one step further, particularly when we come around to talking about learning design. It's around also not just looking at something that needs improving, but creating the best possible solution using your creativity, observation, inquiry, and so on, right? So putting those together, what is learning design? For me, it falls out as it's using observation, creativity, looking at what can be and should be improved in the real world in order to increase a learner's chances of acquiring a new knowledge, behavior, or skill, whether that is through experience, teaching, or study. So that would be my back of the envelope response.
That's pretty good. I quite like that. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting, the design definition for me, because I think the key bit of that is about improving or making things better, isn't it? It's not just about changing. So when you were talking about learning, you were saying learning is about bringing about a change in someone through acquiring knowledge or skills or changing their behaviours. But it's the goal is that they move from one state to another.
Yeah.
But change is what that's about, not necessarily improvement. Whereas the design definition is by definition taking the current state and is creating an improved version of that, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think what makes it a challenging thing to talk about is if you look at other design disciplines like furniture design, or like visual design, for example. Like there are very tangible outputs there, like clothes design, fashion design. Like there are things that you can actually, tactile, physical things, or things that you see in your environment or hear in your environment that really speak to the design that has gone into them, and they're kind of manifesting, right?
Yeah.
But I think learning design is harder because ultimately what we're trying to manifest, what we're trying to create, the output there is a change in somebody's knowledge, behavior, mindset, perspective, whatever it is.
That's something they've got to do themselves. So,
yeah,
I mean, that's a key thing with learning, isn't it? You know, you can't guarantee that change is going to happen in the way that you want it to or that you expect it to. It's something the learner themselves has to do. So I guess with learning design, it's about creating the best possible conditions for that change to happen, or increase the likelihood of that change happening in a positive way in someone's brain.
That's a really good point, isn't it? It's like it's transactional. Like you, and I am speaking here, I should say as a huge caveat, I'm not a furniture designer. I'm not a fashion designer.
You missed your calling, Tim.
I know. I mean, that boat may not necessarily have sailed, but the fact that, you know, those things, you create that output and you leave it in the world for people to enjoy, interact with, use, apply in all however suits them, whatever meets their needs. Whereas I think that learning design seems to me to be separate from those pursuits in that it requires something. It requires a lot of the learner at the end of it. Like you're trying to kind of pitch your effort, your learning design effort, at a point in the future, in time, where you hope and think, and to the best of your ability, like know that it's gonna hit them at the right time, in the right way, and that they are going to meet you in that space. Like they're going to bring themselves to it as well. And I think that's a really, we could go into that whole thing a lot more, but like it's a really interesting relationship that you're having with a learner or learners, where you're designing for a space or a moment or a sort of particular like objective that they're trying to achieve, that you're hoping, you know, when this meets them, whether it is online, in a book, in a room, whatever it is, when this meets them, I hope that they bring themselves to it in the way that we'd designed them to. So there is, in that respect, I suppose, like to summarize that waffle, it does require the other person, that learner, to complete it. Right? To finish the act of
yeah, I guess, I mean, that's part of the learning designer's job also, is to increase the likelihood of that happening by, you know, making design decisions that will encourage that learner to do that, make it easy for them to do that, or possible for them to do that, to remove barriers. And that, I guess, by failing to apply learning design, you increase the likelihood that there will be barriers to that learning that you hadn't thought of. By not considering the context in which someone is going to be trying to learn something, what they're bringing to the party, their existing knowledge, their level of motivation, all of those kind of things. If you're not factoring that in and designing for that, or for that context, then I guess would be a failure of learning design, or a lack of learning design. It's down to luck, really, isn't it?
There's a lot that's out of your control. Yeah. I think that you just can't really influence, I suppose, is true to say. But like another way of going at this is like, what does it look like when learning design works? Right. So how do you know that you've learning designed something really well? And I see that as being when the learner is met by the right thing at the right time, and they get where they need to go in the right way. Right. They achieve what they want to achieve in the right way, in the way that's right for them, in the way that feels like they are involved, invested, and getting returns on that investment, right? And seeing that as a result of you doing that, learner, like you have, going back to the start, like accumulated new knowledge, behavior, skills in the way that you need to. I think thinking back to like You started saying there around like what I heard was like things that we can and can't influence, like when you're pitching something to a learner, but you hope it meets them in the right time in the right way. Like learning design is also, to step back from just definitions, like to observe it, is a practice that is ultimately concerned with trying to flatten uncertainties, right? Just trying to work out, there are a million different unknowns that you're coming up against, a million different things you're trying to find out about, a million different things you're trying to test, establish, validate, dismiss. So a lot of the effort, as I see it and as I've worked in it, is just trying to cut through and rationalize all of these unknowns, uncertainties, questions. And actually a huge part of learning design is just asking questions.
Yeah.
Like if I think about the conversations that we have on the daily, so much of it is just asking.
Yeah.
Like, and it's through asking that you're getting clarity on the big stuff, which is like, who am I designing this for? Why am I designing this for them? What do I need to know about, as you said, like their context in which they're operating? And then you've got like more practical things like how much budget have we got? What is the time frame on this? What is the expectation? What is the strategic goal of the organization or the institution? So it's just constantly asking questions to get to a point where you're knocking down, eradicating, or like filtering through all these questions so that you have, as best you can, got a clear view of what you need to do, like what you need to design so that you can deliver something that does help somebody accumulate skills, knowledge, and so on.
Yeah, well, yeah, it actually helps them achieve their goals. So, like you said, all these questions are what is this person trying to achieve? What is their organisation maybe trying to achieve, or other people involved in the process? And without knowing that, then you can't design learning in any kind of meaningful way.
I mean, you could put something together. You can make your best punt. This raises the question like why learning design? Why does it exist? Because like the alternative is that you're designing. Let's talk about a course just as like a simple commodity. The alternative is that you are just designing a course based on like assumptions, based on what you've seen working historically, based on best guesses, based on what you hear is required, based on what's available to you. You're kind of making your best efforts, but through a fairly limited and sort of like not particularly well-serving set of assumptions.
Yeah, I think this is something we've both experienced a lot, isn't it? You're coming from the world of educational publishing. I think this is part of our frustration with that world back in the day, is that basically a lot of the learning design decisions are pre-made. They're just there as assumptions about, this is how you design a course. This is the flow of a module. This is what a lesson looks like. To the extent that a lot of these courses are almost indistinguishable, that what differentiates them is, I don't know, the particular articles that they use or bits of content, but essentially how they work and what they do in terms of learning design is pretty much the same, whatever course you choose. I mean, there is learning design there, but I think on a case-by-case basis, it's just, let's follow the pattern that has already been established and not ask all those questions that you were talking about earlier. Who are these learners? What are they really trying to achieve? How do we best help get them there? Other than market research, where you ask people what they want. And our background is English language teaching, and the answer was usually something like, I don't know, more grammar, for example.
I've been in a number of workshops where that question was asked.
Exactly.
That response.
You can always predict that that's going to be the answer. But, we know that almost certainly is not the right answer if your goal is to help people learn as effectively and efficiently as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the goal of learning design, is if we can understand what the learner is really trying to achieve, what they need to be able to do or to understand or to demonstrate, what change needs to happen in them, coming back to our original definition of learning. If we can understand that and answer all of these questions, what makes them tick? Where do they need to get to? I guess go back to first principles, really, and come up with a learning design that is grounded in the answers to those questions, rather than grounded in, let's do something like what we always do because that's what everyone always does. And I think that's what we've seen a lot of in learning materials, certainly in my experience, and I know in yours too, and that's always been a source of frustration. That's not learner-centered design.
Yeah, and this comes back to this idea of asking questions, right? Which is, bad learning design is certainly, for me, defined mostly by just a lack of inquiry, a lack of empathy. I mean, asking somebody what they want to see more of is a useless enterprise for so many reasons.
Yeah.
it's lazy, and it will more often than not give you the answer you expect to hear. Like it's riddled with confirmation bias and all that sort of stuff. And and it's fine. I think I should also say that I don't see learning design as needing to be like deliberately different, or the output doesn't need to be distinctly, markedly different from what else is available, other options or approaches are available or are being taken. I think that it's okay if you go through the learning design process and like imply the right inquiry, testing, go through what you need to go through and do what you need to do to feel like you've flattened all of those uncertainties and unknowns and assumptions. And if you arrive at the point where actually, more grammar is needed here, like that's totally fine. But you've got, in the process of doing that, you have told the story of how you got there, and you can stand by it. And you can say that the reason we're doing this is because this is what I know about the learner. This is what I saw them doing. This is what they said about not just what they want to do, but why they want to do it. Like this is how I know that they operate and how I know they access the course, to use that as a model. Like that's totally fine. It's not about being deliberately disruptive or deliberately distinct for the sake of it. It's about how you arrive at that point.
I think so, yeah. And also, applying knowledge and expertise about what actually works in learning, which most learners don't have, and it's not reasonable to expect that they would necessarily. So when someone says, I want more grammar, it's not a stupid response, but that is probably not the right answer. But then, they're not experts in what works in learning. And I think that part of the responsibility of a learning designer is to try and understand, okay, who are you? What are you trying to achieve? Okay, given the answers to those questions, here's what is most likely to be effective for you.
Yeah.
To help you achieve that. And actually, it's not going to be what you thought it was, because the evidence suggests that what you need is X, Y, and Z instead. And as a learning designer, that's part of, I think, that's our responsibility, is to bring that to the party and say, well, actually, if that's where you want to get to, here's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And here's some evidence to back that up.
To add a third answer to what is learning design.
Yeah.
the mental model that I've got of this is, or the mental picture, I suppose, or mental metaphor is of like a music studio mixing desk. Right? So you picture those huge, like long desks that you see in like documentaries like Behind the Music, where you've got like rows and rows of faders and switches and dials and gauges and lights and all this sort of stuff, all of which influences a really specific sound or instrument or some aspect of that final music mix, right? You've got like a billion different ways that you could ultimately mix the song down.
Yeah.
And I see like the role of the learning designer, to put it into a role, is to tune their ear to what needs to come out of that mix, and to use all of those dials, faders, etc., to optimize that, to get to that point. It's like I see what needs to happen, I can hear what needs to happen, and like I know how all of these different switches, dials can be adjusted to achieve that. And what do I mean by switches, dials, and faders? Like in that metaphor, it's things like the platform that they're working in. It's the type of content they're interacting in. It's the amount, the volume, the pace of content that they interact with.
Yeah.
It's like the audio assets, the video assets that they are engaging with, like how they're designed. There's so much of this stuff. What device do they access this on? What is the course looking like? What is the journey through the course? How are all of the learning objectives connected? All of this sort of stuff are all levers, faders, buttons that you can configure to get where where your best guess tells you need to go.
Yeah, I like that analogy, and I guess a skilled learning designer is someone who knows which buttons to press or which faders to move where in order to get the desired effect, and that's not going to be immediately obvious unless you have that experience and that knowledge. Yeah, to take that music analogy a bit deeper, so you might be listening to a mix and I don't know, you might say, I can't hear the bass properly. A novice mixer would just turn the bass up, but that just might mess up the whole mix. And actually an experienced mixer might say, you can't hear the bass properly because one of the guitars is too loud in its low frequencies and it's kind of masking the bass. So I'm going to make a little cut in that guitar without changing the bass, and suddenly it's there, perfect, and the mix sounds brilliant. So it's that. I guess it's that kind of knowing what to look for and what dials to move, and that's what a good learning designer is able to do. We probably stretched that analogy about as far as we can take it there, Tim, but
never overstretch an analogy.
I was going to use a medical analogy, which is like the coming back to the give me more grammar thing. It's a bit like asking a patient to come up with their own diagnosis, and then they'll probably just say, give me antibiotics. Whereas, a good doctor will sort of dig a bit and kind of ask questions and try and understand what's going on, and maybe find something not immediately obvious and come up with a better solution. Although I do find that these days doctors do actually ask you, what do you think's wrong with you? It's like, I've come to you, you're the bloody doctor.
That's amazing. I do the idea of a doctor just like opening up their pill box and be like, which of these do you think?
Yeah.
Exactly. Which of these capsules do you think is going to help you out?
Yeah, you can have the red pill or the blue pill. Which do you want?
You decide.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just gonna milk that music analogy one a little bit more, because I think it kind of opens up an interesting metaphor for like this elusive term, learning experience. Right. So learning designers behind the desk, fading things out, mixing things, turning things up and down, all the rest of it. And ultimately what you're trying to do is get that track just right so that somebody hears that in full polyphonic stereo and just like loves it. Gets that magical musical moment where that song hits them at the right time and transports them somewhere. And like they keep coming back to that song. It leaves an indelible mark on them. Like that for me is like, that's what learning experience is. It's like, as a learning designer, I'm trying to get something that really hits you and stays with you. And going back to your point, it's knowing what to adjust up, down, in, out, or just to get rid of in order to do that. I think that's how I would tie up that
bit of a learning
strange metaphor.
Learning design adventure there we went on. Yeah, I like that way.
I know that you didn't study learning design anywhere, that, I haven't studied learning design. It's kind of been, certainly for me, like an accumulatory thing. But like, what was your journey? How did you end up identifying as a learning designer now?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I think we both had quite a circuitous route to doing that. So in my case, starting as a teacher 24 years ago, nearly. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Teaching English, where to some extent, thinking about everything we've just described, to some extent you do actually do some of that as a teacher. You're not designing courses, but you're creating learning experiences every time you go into a classroom. You're taking materials that have been designed for the purposes of facilitating learning and using those with people to try and help them make those changes, that we talked about, to learn, and adapting those materials as you do that as well, based on what is going to work for those learners. For me, I think it would be very hard to be a good learning designer without having been a teacher. That feels like a kind of an essential grounding of having that experience of day in, day out, going into a classroom with learners, helping them try to achieve their learning goals, using designed learning materials to do that, adapting those materials, creating your own materials, your own lessons, and so on. So I guess that's my starting point. And then moving into publishing. So I was in educational publishing for 10 plus years, developing digital English language teaching products. And I guess that's more kind of explicitly learning design, but with a lot of the flaws that we talked about earlier, in the sense of there wasn't necessarily that much of a conscious design process that went into some of those products and materials, or it was at least there was like a preset design that everyone just followed, maybe, or an approach that you followed. So in digital materials, it would be, we present something through a text or a video or something, and then we have some multiple choice questions to test understanding. And then we do that again. And then we do that again. And then we do that again. And it's pretty much variations on a theme. So I guess a lot of time spent doing that and learning the ropes about, a lot of practical elements. You learn through the process of doing that and on a sort of commercial basis or for a commercial organization developing products. Working with teachers and learners to understand what they want and trying to build that into products and work within the constraints of platforms and authoring tools and all of those kind of things. And then as LearnJam over the last few years, applying those skills that in a huge variety of different ways with all sorts of different types of situations, different clients, different types of learners. Again, language learning stuff, but also workplace learning, sales training, things like that. And doing the kind of stuff we've been talking about, working to understand learners, what their motivations are, what they're trying to achieve, and then working down from sort of big picture to the nuts and bolts of what goes into a learning product. And as you said earlier, thinking about content and design decisions and so on. So for me, it's basically been a practical education in learning to do that. It's learning by doing over a period of 20 or so years, combined with reading and a bit of research into learning science, bringing that to bear and mashing that up with the practical experience. Well, I would say that in my case, I definitely lean more on the practical experience than on the theory. That's something I'm looking to balance out more, I think, in my own work. So yeah, that's my answer. How about you, Tim?
Very similar, right? I think generally it's just been like a process of accumulation, like picking up various things from the various experiences and roles I've been in, and then also following my own curiosity generally has brought me here. The origin story is taught English in China for 4 years. So I did my CELTA, then went over to teach, ended up teaching young children, despite the CELTA being entirely inappropriate teaching. Well, not entirely inappropriate, but like not designed for the teaching environment I ended up in. And like loved teaching, but like was practicing learning design without knowing it in the environment in the school environment where my class had been provided with a set of materials that were just totally inappropriate for the age, language abilities of the students. So like as a teacher on the hoof, you're looking to like improve on what's there in order to have desired results. And so that kind of led me then into, from there I went to publishing, worked in the same organisation you worked at, Laurie. That's where we met, wasn't it?
Really?
That's funny, isn't it? And then started sort of working on publishing materials for young learners. And I think grew quite, disillusioned, I suppose, with that process and the lack of design, I think, to pick up on your point, that was kind of being exercised. I think calling it like a publishing company, it kind of already is thinking output out the door, like stuff going out, rather than what is the best and right thing to do. And went through that process, and in doing so, kind of got lit up by what I was seeing happening in like the edtech space, in digital product design spaces, and kind of just exploring and picking up on like ways of working, methodologies, thinking that I felt really helped me to do the sort of learning content design and not learning content development that I wanted to do. And that's a continuing thing, right? I mean, it doesn't feel like, I certainly don't feel like I've ended up as being like fully fledged, high flying end result learning designer. Like you continue to find stuff out and learn stuff.
Yeah.
And I think, again, that for me is the most exciting thing about doing this is you're always learning about something from a completely different field. Like behavior design, for example, or strategies for being creative, like creativity strategies. Like it's all relevant and it all has a place and it all really strengthens your practice and it all really helps improve your ability to find the right solution. So yeah, I kind of got here through just kind of following curiosity, I suppose.
Well, I think that's the thing with what I find with learning design is that the more you find out or the more you learn, the more you realise you don't know in a way, and the more there is to learn, which is at one level quite daunting, but on the other hand, I think, as you said, it's quite inspiring as well. It's the gift that keeps on giving. There's just always more that you could learn. And like you said, looking outside, which is something I think we've always tried to do, isn't it? Looking in other areas or other industries or other fields and thinking about what's working there that we could bring into learning that might be interesting or might help. And sort of using that as a spur to creativity. I think that's what keeps it fresh and interesting.
The most exciting thing happens when somebody let's say in the learning design community or somebody working in a similar field just shares with you a book or podcast or way of thinking that's totally new to you, and it just blows open like a whole other way of approaching what you're doing. And that for me is like the magical moment in learning design. Is it's not always like the work, it's all of the conversations, relationships, sharing, curiosity that happens around that and that facilitates that, and that certainly in the work that we do together, like drives you on to do more interesting, enthused things, continuing to evolve and discover new ways of working. That is really exciting.
Awesome. I think that is a beautiful note on which to finish, Tim.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Oh, well, until tomorrow morning, my friend. Yeah. Until tomorrow.
Adventures in Learning Design was brought to you by LearnJam.
To find out more about what we do and who we do it for, come and pay us a visit at LearnJam.com.